Flint, and I'm with Peter Manuel, and we're talking about ways in which Australians can take back Australia. What I was doing a week or so ago was writing a piece for The Spectator, which appeared in The Spectator. And it was about the Prime Minister's speech to the National Press Club. And I thought this was a momentous occasion, and I thought perhaps he might be saying something of really great importance to the nation. That it was on labour regulation, the setting up of working parties, and the standardisation of fees. Perhaps important issues, but I thought this was really a turning point. And I've made a suggestion as to what the Prime Minister should be saying. And if I may, Peter, I'd like to read that to you.
That would be
On
good.
behalf of the National Cabinet, I solemnly promise from this day forward to turn over a new page. Henceforth, we shall always put Australia first. When the next pandemic comes, and it will come, we will follow world's best practice. This is the last time that Australia will be governed by modelling, by models and unelected experts. I'll give you back the cheap and reliable electricity we took from you, and thus return and bring back manufacturing. Australia will fulfill its destiny to be a major world food bowl. We will move water to where it is needed with the fast-track construction of several dams during this first term. We will take measures to ensure that bushfires no longer have the impact that they have on the country. We will target the loads in the forests to ensure that that does not happen. We will ensure that immigration is reduced until these measures have effect, so that other parts of the country become attractive. Immigration will be merit-based, and we will ensure that defence contracts are only used for the purpose of defending the country and not for political purposes. We will immediately drop the Turnbull submarine contract. We will also forbid the so-called investment into Australia by entities which are no more than Communist Front corporations. We will ensure also that there is the setting up, the election of a convention of unpaid delegates to review the Constitution of Australia on the same principles on which we were founded. This would be the first such general convention in over 100 years. And it is timely that we look at the Constitution again, particularly the way in which it has been interpreted by the High Court, with the intention of ensuring that Australia is governed better and that the politicians and other institutions of Australia are accountable to you, the people. That, Peter, was the short speech. I suggested that Mr. Morrison might continue for his next major speech, rather than something on more greater details about what he is doing. I think it's very important that we address the significant problems of Australia. Electricity, which once used to be the cheapest and most reliable in the world, which is now very expensive and increasingly unreliable, that we attend to water, that we move water to where it's needed. We allow the farmers to build their dams, and we build dams too, so as to make the inland attractive, so that towns will develop inland, farms will flourish, and we'll have that spreading of development in Australia that the United States has. We won't have Australia just clinging to the coast, which is unfortunate and which makes it very difficult to handle immigration. So temporarily, we'll have to reduce immigration until it becomes more attractive for immigrants to go to rural areas, to country areas, where the prices are cheaper, real estate is cheaper, and the towns allow for much greater freedom in terms of not being caught up in traffic and so on. And we would, as a government, if we were the government, we would address the bushfire problem We would ensure that the fuel loads in the forests and on the roads and the way in which the farmers are inhibited and not allowed to control the loads on their properties, we would ensure that would end, which would mitigate the amount of flooding. And we'd make sure in future the defence contracts were not used for political purposes, as so notoriously occurred under previous government. Accordingly, we will cancel the submarine contract. That is the contract to provide submarines at some far distant time in the future, to provide submarines which will be obsolete when they are provided, and requiring the French to rip out the nuclear engines and put in conventional engines. All that will stop, and all that money, almost $200 billion, will not be wasted, but we will ensure that that goes greatly towards the defense of this country. We'll reverse the fall in standards in education, which is a terrible thing because our standards are falling below that of the countries to the north, and in one instance in relation to even Kazakhstan. And because so much of this is caused by the political class and the way in which they've captured the process, we would require that the convention be elected of unpaid delegates, self-funded delegates, elected by all the people of Australia to do what was done in the 19th century. They set up a constitution in the 19th century. It was the only way that we could federate, by handing it over to the people. We would do the same thing, as to review the constitution with the purpose of improving the way we're governed and making all institutions, all of the parliaments, all of the courts, all of them accountable to the people and accountable 24/7, not just in confected elections every few years where the pre-selections are pre-arranged and run by cabals of power brokers where the choice is very limited. Well, that's the sort of speech that I thought the Prime Minister would make. Peter, what do you think?
Absolutely brilliant, David. Putting power back to the people. In Scott Morrison's speech, did he mention about kickstarting manufacturing? Did he mention about kickstarting our industry again, becoming self-sufficient in food production? Because if this, we do have another outbreak, we're not in a vulnerable position. Did he mention any of that?
If he did, I don't recall it, and I don't think it was that significant. Mr. Morrison has a very nice style. He was using auto cues, and it was a prepared speech, but he seemed to concentrate. He seemed to be saying that if we could deal with the problems of labour regulation and also reduce technical and further education TAFE costs, or make them standard across Australia, that this would solve the problem. I don't think that's the problem. These may be problems, but the significant problems are, as we all know, electricity. That old Labour man, Graham Richardson, the grandee of the Labour Party, in a piece in the Australian at the bottom, acknowledged towards the end of the piece all this talk about bringing back manufacturing to Australia. We can't even bring back aluminium smelting. Now, we should be good at aluminium smelting because we've got the bauxite. So you put the aluminium smelting next to the bauxite. So we get the advantage of processing it here rather than sending it overseas and then importing it back. We could do that, but we can't, and we can't do it. And he pointed out the reasons we can't do it, because the electricity now is too expensive. It's about 3 times as expensive as it was. And it's becoming more and more unreliable. He didn't say why it's expensive and why it's becoming unreliable. It's because of this obsession with global warming, an obsession which, when they found that global warming wasn't occurring, they changed the name to climate change. It's a myth. It's almost a religion. And they're spending an enormous amount of money with the Chinese, who are very willing to sell these things to us. And they sell us windmills to produce electricity, knowing full well that these are unreliable and very expensive, and they'll wear out, and they cost a lot of fossil energy to produce, and they're not reliable because they only work when the wind is blowing. And we're wasting billions of dollars on this search for renewable energy when we have the energy on this continent. We've got the nuclear energy, we've got the coal, we have the best coal in the world, and we have it at the cheapest rates, and we could be, as we once were, providing this wonderful, cheap and reliable electricity. And if we proceed with water, which Bob Hawke stopped us from doing, he stopped us from doing that, he stopped us from nuclear energy. If we proceeded with hydro and water and all these things, we could have a mix of wonderful ways in which we could have fuel in Australia. And if people are obsessed about carbon dioxide emissions, I can't see the point, because carbon dioxide is absolutely crucial to life. But if we are obsessed by that, the nuclear and hydro energies would ensure that you have very low emissions, and the modern coal-fired power stations are very secure against producing excessive emissions. We have everything here. It's just we don't have the will.
We have the will, David. We have the will, but we've got people in power that certainly don't have the will. There's too much money involved. Where there's money, there's corruption, and then, of course, it comes power, and people just go silly over power. And it's a shame what's going on in this country. Yes, I totally agree. We could do everything that we used to do that was taken away from us. We made everything here in this country. Water, when a farmer bought a farm and there was water on that property, he could use it. We need to get back where a farmer can make money on a small acreage of land again. It depends on what they're growing. If you're growing beef or sheep, you need a sizable property. But if you're growing vegetables or herbs or whatever, you don't need a great deal of land at all. It's all this, get big or get out. In other words, let the corporates take over. Well, I say, go and jump in the lake to that, because the more small farmers that we've got, the more regional towns that benefit, because people are, bringing up their children, bringing up their family. You've got kids going to sporting clubs. They're mixing together. It's good for mental health. It's good for everything. And I just can't understand our politicians today, where we see all as they want to do is raise taxes, levies, revenue getters. In actual fact, and I've been in many different businesses, David, in actual fact, if you reduce taxes, you get more money in the coffers, because what happens is people feel confident, they start to spend more, so there's more money going in to GST, and they're not worried about, gee, what are we going to get hit with next? Higher power, or this goalpost's going to get changed, and more emergency service levy, and more rates and taxes and all the rest of it. You've got to have confidence, and if you've got confidence, it has a chain reaction right through the community. And unfortunately, we haven't got anybody that I can see in power that's got a real business brain. We really haven't, and that's a shame. And until we get those sort of people, this country's not going to go ahead. And here's an opportunity now for Scott Morrison to be really talking up the benefits of getting back to manufacturing, getting back to industry, letting the mum and dad farmers of Australia farm. But we're not hearing that. He should be really hammering that, and we're not hearing that, David. And one other little issue that you brought up about immigration, if I can comment. What we should be doing is have a look at the way in South Africa that the white South African farmers have been, murdered off their farms. I think there's about 3,000 to date, white South African farmers that have been murdered by blacks. Now, I'm not having a go at blacks, but this is actually what's happening. I've got a lot of Indigenous friends, other friends of different nationalities, white, black, brindle, whatever colour you want to know. And I'm not racist at all, I can assure you, but this is fact. There's 35,000 non-farmer whites being murdered, or that have been murdered, in South Africa. Where's this on the mainstream media? Where are the protests? And where is the United Nations on this issue? If we talk about immigration, we should be bringing those white South African farmers to Australia. And gee, I tell you what, we could do with their help on many, many farms, and they could contribute to this country big time. David.
I think you're absolutely right, Peter. And you refer to the South African farmers. And you're absolutely right. This is a terrible situation, completely ignored around the world, ignored by the media, ignored by governments, and ignored by the United Nations and by their Human Rights Council, on which all sorts of curious countries are located, including the People's Republic of China, which is hardly a paragon in human rights. Now, those farmers would be ideal for Australia. It would satisfy a problem in South Africa where they are being discriminated against and treated appallingly, although the South African government denies this. They would be wonderful immigrants, because what we do need are not less but more family farmers, for the very good reasons that you enumerate, particularly the development of the country. The country can't be developed by large agro businesses. They will just sap the country dry, and they won't provide the integration which we need. And other countries understand that rural communities are very important. The French, in particular, they protect them, and we should protect them, and we should encourage them. And the South African farmers, with their farming ability and their values, they would make superb immigrants. They should come at the top of the list, not the bottom. And I can't understand why, and I think it's important that we do look after other people, but I can't understand why they aren't at the top of the list. And there were a couple of other matters which you mentioned, which I may comment on. Firstly, I think I agree with you entirely. The South African farmers should be at the top of the list. The second thing is, you did mention that, unfortunately, our national cabinet doesn't seem to have the background to understand many of these things, and this became very evident during this whole crisis. If you check on the backgrounds of all of the premiers and the Prime Minister, almost all of them have been in politics. Their principal job has been a political job, working in a political office, waiting for a safe seat and getting that safe seat and getting into Parliament. One person did have some business experience of a limited nature. Now, you need people with broader experience, and if they don't have that experience themselves, then they should be willing to draw on it and not just listen to experts in computer modeling or such obscure things which produce all sorts of ridiculous conclusions, as we have seen. And you did mention the importance, a very important issue, and that is taxation. And it is, I think, established that if you lower taxes, you encourage more industry to develop. Now, this is always denied. Whenever it is proposed, the left-wing establishment denies that fact. But there were 3 presidents of the United States in living memory who applied this policy. One was John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the great Kennedy, a Democrat, who did precisely that and had precisely that result of encouraging industry. Ronald Reagan did it, and he had the Reagan miracle, as they called it, when the American economy revived to an extraordinary degree and became strong enough to support his foreign policy, which was to bring down the Soviet Union, the evil Soviet Union, and to do that without firing a shot. And that's what he did. It was an extraordinary thing. And then Donald Trump did the same in the most extraordinary reviving of the American economy. President Obama had said that they would never see manufacturing again. All that manufacturing would never come back. And they saw their role as managing nicely the decline of the United States. Donald Trump wasn't going to have a bar of that. His theme, as everybody knows, was Make America Great Again. And he created the most extraordinary revival of the economy, which was shorted, stunted by the virus from China, the Wuhan virus, which has so damaged the world. But even then, just last week, as they're closing down the lockdown, which is mainly in Democrat states and is being used by some treacherous politicians as an election gimmick to try and make sure he doesn't win the next election. We saw this extraordinary revival in jobs, which every economist said it would not happen, that jobs would reduce. But last Friday, the figures came out and they're already being stimulated. And he said we would have a recovery, and that's what is happening in America. And it's very much because he reduced taxation significantly. He reduced regulation significantly. America became an extraordinary revived economy. It became the world's biggest energy provider, no longer dependent on the Middle East for energy. And the unemployment rates were low across the nation and for every class, including the racial minorities, including African Americans, including Latin Americans. The employment rates were the highest that they have been in a very long period of time. And he achieved this by those sensible policies that you mentioned, that is, reducing taxation, reducing regulation, and of course he was very favorable to the farmers. He was intent on assisting them and stopping the persecution of the farmers, which is the same in America as it is here, and also, incidentally, protecting religion as it has never been protected for many years in the United States. So he has been a wonderful president. He sets the example which Mr. Morrison and every Western leader should be following, so that we too could enjoy what Donald Trump is delivering and will deliver again in the United States.
I don't hide the fact, David. I love the man. I wish we had a Trump, and you talk a lot of sense, just like Donald Trump. If you only have to look at the man, he's a businessman. He's running the country as a business, and he wants the country to be a successful business, like he's been a successful businessman. And we have a look at manufacturing. Manufacturing in America is the best it's been since 2004. So how many jobs has that created? You mentioned about the farmer. Yes, he is looking after the mum and dad farmers of America, big time, especially with water, which badly needs to happen here with our politicians. For some reason, it doesn't matter whether it's Liberal or Labor, they don't seem to want the mum and dad farmer to be successful. And I'd love to sit down with Scott Morrison one day and really ask him why. David, I'd like to just bring up something else. Who's actually running the country and the states? Because with this Black Lives Matter protest that we've seen around Australia, here in South Australia, the Commissioner of Police was the one that okayed the protest rally here in Adelaide. So who's actually running the show? Where's our Premier on this? I mean, he's silent, so does he approve? I would have thought, and I'm being a little bit thick here, I'm not an academic like yourself, but would it be up to the Commissioner of Police to be able to okay this protest rally? I would have thought it would have been up to the Premier.
Well, as you know, I was always opposed to the lockdown. I thought world's best practice, as revealed by Taiwan, applied to a bit by Sweden, was that you strictly control your borders in the way that we didn't sufficiently. And then you ensure that you protect the vulnerable. And we know from this virus that the vulnerable are the elderly and those who have other illnesses. You look after them. and you let the rest of the economy go, and you don't close down the economy. That, I think, was a terrible mistake, a mistake which is costing billions and ruined people's lives and caused them great despair. Many businesses won't open again. But you're quite right. Having decided on that, having decided on making social distancing mandatory instead of just saying, as the Swedes said, we'll tell the people what we think they should be doing, but we'll rely on their good sense to do that, as used to be the case here. Instead of doing that, they offered these mandatory rules, and I was shocked when I saw mounted police on the park behind Bondi Beach, going round, and they told an Asian family of about 3 having a little picnic on the grass, they had to leave, harassing a man lying on a towel, enjoying a bit of sun, and then there was an old lady sitting on a park bench having a little drink. Mounted police going around harassing people became a police state. They were very firm and rigorous. But as soon as this protest thing arose, this left-wing protest thing, all of the politicians went to water. And, for example, the Premier of New South Wales said, well, we do believe in the right of people to protest. And they approved a demonstration in Sydney of vast numbers of people in peak hours disrupting the traffic, and certainly not social distancing. They were doing anything but social distancing, carrying, I might add, one of them was carrying a poster saying, the only good cop is a dead cop. All this allowed by our weak-kneed politicians. And they are normally power drunk if they're controlling and pushing around us. But when it came to the left, of whom they're a little frightened, and the potential for them to disrupt the streets, they went to water and immediately said, oh, let them go ahead. Then, of course, you got this mess in Sydney where not only did we have one demonstration of thousands on Tuesday night, but then a big demonstration at the weekend. Promises are more all about something happening in the United States, something which is not happening here, because we know that the percentage of non-Indigenous people in the jails is the percentage of them dying in prison is the same as those of the Indigenous. There's no significant difference. But it's not an Australian problem, and they all went to water. In South Australia, obviously, the Commissioner must have had the clearance of the police to go of the government to go ahead and authorise the procession, as they did in Sydney. In fact, in Sydney, because the poor demonstrators, the Communist Party demonstration, because they said, oh, we haven't got time to revise this. The police actually wrote out the application for them, phoned them up and said, is this what you want? They bent over backwards to see the laws which they were telling us were so rigorous, which they're telling every small business person, you can't have more than so many people once we let you open, and some businesses you can't open. You can't have more than 10 people in a church, they were saying, and so many people at a funeral. People are not going to funerals and weddings, and all the law-abiding citizens of Australia have had this rubbed in their face by our weak-kneed politicians who are power drunk in relation to us, but weak-kneed in relation to the riotous left. And this is appalling, and it should stop.
Totally agree, David. And what really gets me is here in South Australia, I say there was about 4,000 at this protest. Where did all these people come from? I would guarantee that some were working in supermarkets, aged care, hospitals, wherever. So all these people are going to be back in work and all the rest of it. If there's going to be an outbreak, there's got to be heads that roll here. The police commissioner, the organiser of these protests, the premiers, the bureaucrats, the Minister for Health, the whole flaming lot should be well, as far as I'm concerned, they should be damn well locked up, because what they've done is they've absolutely destroyed so many decent people's lives to let this left garbage go ahead in this country. And I think it is absolutely disgusting. And what should happen now is We should be open for business right now. This garbage about 10 or 20 at a funeral or so many at the football and all the rest of it, they are becoming a laughing stock. What happened in the beginning? Australia was being commended, but I can assure you now their popularity is going to go down the gurgler quick smart because they are looking fools. They have pandered to the left, and we know what the left want. They want all free enterprise gone. They don't care if people haven't got a job because they can go cap in hand to the government to get a handout, and that's where you can be controlled. And that's exactly what socialism is about, and that's what this garbage is all about. And I'm absolutely disgusted with all concern. And as far as I'm concerned, all lives matter, not just black lives, all lives matter.
I think you're absolutely right, Peter. And I think the politicians have failed us completely. It's like all of the elites. My bank, Westpac, for example, has announced that they're not going to fund coal-fired or coal mines if the coal is going to be used domestically. Well, how dare they? They should be funding all operations. The only operations they shouldn't fund are those which are judged will not be profitable enough to repay the mortgages. But I think we have a problem, and you've signaled it accurately. All of the elites, the political class, many in the media, and many among the executives and the business class are all so overwhelmed by the views and doctrines of the Marxists that they go along with them, thinking that provided they go along with them, like many of those who went into China, they think if they go along with them and look the other way, they will make a lot of money out of that sort of transaction. Well, I think it all has to stop, and we have to stop this double dealing as we've seen so outrageously in Australia. So on that point, Peter, I'd like to thank you for spending some time with me. I think it's been, I've certainly learned a lot from you because you're a real person, you're a farmer, and you know what's going on in the country much more than the politicians seem to or admit that they know. Well, thank you, Peter.
Yeah, David, just before you go, I think it's very important, and thank you very much for those kind words, but I think it's very, very important for people to know that are going to view this video that you've taken the time to come and have a look what's going on. You've been to events that we've been involved with, and you've listened, and you can see exactly what's happening, where these other people, these bureaucrats and these politicians will look you in the eye and they'll say things to appease you, and they walk off and they couldn't care less as long as their money is going into their bank accounts. But you have taken the time to actually come out and look and see what's actually happening at grassroots level, and you can see it all, David, and we really appreciate that. And you mentioned Westpac Bank said that coal that is, sorry, that, could you just recap what you said about the Westpac Bank?
What Westpac said that they would not be funding, they would not be lending money in relation to coal mining in Australia if it were being developed for coal-fired power stations after a certain date.
If I could just make a quick comment on that. People out there that are with Westpac make a very, very powerful move. You've got to show how powerful you really are. Take your money out. If you go into a shop, say a cafe, you're not happy with the coffee, you're not happy with the food that you've had, you're not happy with the service, you don't go back. As an individual, that is a very, very powerful move. Collectively, the people that are with Westpac, after that disgusting comment from Westpac, take your money out. Show Westpac how powerful you really are. And David, I can't thank you enough for these discussions to get the message out. And you should be in Scott Morrison's place. And that letter that you wrote, personally send it to him. And for crying out loud, let's hope that he reads it, he takes it on board, because it's just plain common sense. Thank you very much, David. I do appreciate it.
And if anyone who wants to read that draft speech, it's in Spectator Australia. Just Google Spectator Australia. Then when you get into the site, Google my name, and it will be a recent piece by me in Spectator Australia. And our proposal that there be a convention is to change the constitution to empower the people to have much more control over the politicians. It's not about having more politicians or new party. It's about controlling the politicians wherever they come from, which can happen. It's called direct democracy. The Swiss have it. We were going to have it because of a Prime Minister, Premier of South Australia at the time of Federation, but the others said it wouldn't be necessary. It is necessary now, certainly, to be looked at in an elected convention of unpaid non-party delegates. Well, thank you very much, Peter. And I'll close on, again, mentioning the important slogan, Australians, take back your country.
Thanks, David.